Welcome again. Here we are at week 8, and this week we're going to be talking about the balance line. Remember back in week 3, we spent the whole week on the alligator, and we're coming back to revisit that alligator and revisit the balance line this week. This week our goal is to understand and know how to use the balance line signals. This is the 5th dimension. Remember that the first dimension was the fractal. We covered that in week 4, and then in week 5 we covered the AO, the awesome oscillator, week 6 the accelerator, decelerator, and then in week 7 the zone trades. And now we're going to put it all together and enter our last grounded assessment, and this is what we take our signals on, and this is what we make our trades on, and this we call the balance line trades. So let's go over to our slides and look at the balance line trades. This is Professor Alligator again with the balance line, and this week we're going to review what is the balance line. Remember that the balance line is that place where the current price would be if there were no new incoming information, which we know is chaos. Let's look at that on a screen. This is the balance line, and the balance line is a 13-bar smooth moving average of the midpoint of the price bars that's displaced 8 bars into the future. So looking at it on the chart, if you see this square here, inside this square there are 13 bars. And if you were to take the midpoint of each one of those 13 bars, average it out, what you would get would be this point right here, where the cursor is. And that cursor is offset 8 bars into the future. Now remember that the balance line is where the price would be right now if there were no new incoming information. So the difference between the balance line and where the current price is can be attributed to new incoming information. That's very, very vital information for your trading and your success. So reviewing again, just to make sure you understand, and hopefully by this time you really do, the balance line is simply a 13-bar smooth moving average that's displaced 8 bars into the future. An interesting way to think about the balance line is that this balance line is a continental divide. This is the top of the mountain, so that anytime the price moves away from the balance line, whether it's going up here or whether it's going down, both directions, up and down, are basically downhill from the balance line. So the prices can move much easier in this area because it's moving away from the balance line than it can in this area moving toward the balance line, moving toward the balance line here, and moving away from the balance line. So one thing to keep in mind always is that prices move away from the balance line easier than they move toward the balance line. Let's illustrate it this way. The balance line would be this center part right here. This is the balance line, and pretend that you have a ball that's sitting right on this balance line. It's in equilibrium, and it's at rest, and all it takes is a little bit of push to push it over the side, and then gravity, which is a strange attractor in the real world, would pull it down. The same thing is true with prices. As prices start to move away from this balance line, the prices have momentum in their favor naturally, and they're going to move away easier. So the path of least resistance for either one of these balls would be down on the right here, down on the left here, depending which way it left the balance line. That we call a saddle point. And a saddle point is basically a point of equilibrium which can be upset very easily by a little bit of new information. Doesn't take a lot. Let's take another example. Here we go with the balance line again. The balance line is in the middle, and this is the saddle point, and this guy is trying to go uphill. It's going to be tougher for that guy to get uphill than it is for this guy to go downhill. Another way of putting that from a physics standpoint is it takes much more energy to move the price toward the balance line, much more new information, stronger new information, than it does to move the price away from the balance line. So this guy going away from the balance line, and any prices that go away from the balance line, move easier than those that are going toward the balance line. Let's take another illustration from an actual chart. Here we have a 13 bars on this square here, on this rectangle, and notice that they're coming toward the balance line. And the movement from this bottommost point to the balance line was 56 points, and it took 13 bars. Now when that price crossed over the balance line, and remember that's the top of the hill, they're going uphill here and they're going downhill here. 13 bars after it moved away, it moved almost three times as much. It moved 161 points away from the balance line. This is a good illustration of the path of least resistance and how the price naturally moves away from the balance line. And in our trading, we want to take advantage of that at every opportunity we can. Let's go to the next slide, putting those two together. Moving away from the balance line is the same as this guy running downhill. Moving toward the balance line would be comparable to this guy going uphill. Let's go further. Now, let's look at how we locate new information. Let's take a couple of examples, and then we'll use several charts to illustrate this. Our job today is to understand how to read new information. So let's assume that we have a balance line here, and this is the top of the mountain, and going away from the balance line is easier than going toward it. We have a bar here. This is one bar. Then the next bar has a lower high. Now we want to look at what new information is. And as you know, that this bar and any bar is always a battle between the buyers and the sellers. On this second bar here, the buyers have lost ground. It's kind of like a football game. And up here they're on the 40-yard line. Down here they're back on the 30-yard line. The sellers have pushed the buyers back on the ball field. So what we want to know is how much information would it take to get that back on the 50-yard line. And basically it would take this amount of new information, enough new information to move the price to the top of this little square here. So this particular part here is new information. Now it may be just a bit confusing, but think about it and we'll simplify it this way. Anytime you're looking at the price chart, you want to read from right to left because you're looking at the back, the back in the time into the past to see what it would take to overcome what these people have done. So new information allowed the buyers, or the sellers rather, to take this high price down here. They were able to take it down this far, but then the buyers wouldn't let them take it any further. So in reading both the fractal and the balance line, which are the two signals that you read from the price chart, you always read from right to left. When you're reading the momentum chart and the zone chart, you want to go with the momentum, you want to go with the zone. So in those two charts, you always read from left to right. So this is the new information that's contained in these two bars. Now, let's take an example. Let's say that the next bar comes down here. Well, what that tells us is at this time period, the sellers were more powerful than the buyers, and the buyers, pushing as hard as they could only get it up to this part. Our question then is, where would we be wrong in being short here? And we would be wrong when enough new information comes into the market to overcome this square here. And if new information comes into the market, then we know that the people who were trading in this time period, the sellers have been overcome. Now let me review that again real quickly. We read new information by going backwards in time, by going from right to left. And the new information for a buy is always going to be the highs. The new information for lows, the opposite would always be the lows. So if we have a bar here and then the next bar here, that tells us that the buyers in this period, the second period, were able to overcome the sellers, and the sellers could only take it down that much. The new information we're looking for, again, is the difference between the two lows, because we're looking for a place to go short. Now, you might want to review this in your computorial. There are more views of this in the computorial and in the book and in your manual. We're putting it in 3 different ways in 3 different places to make sure you can get it and make sure it becomes automatic to you. Now let's go back to the slides, and let's illustrate this again on the slides just for review. Again, we're locating new information. Now at this point, what we have is the balance line. And on the balance line, just as we illustrated on the board, we have a bar. And then we come in with a lower bar. Now once this second bar is created, then the new information is that block right there, the difference between the highs. So if we're looking for a place to buy, and if we're in a trend and the trend backs up and we want to get back into the trend, then the balance line signal is probably the best deal we have. So that becomes new information. Now let's put another bar in there. The difference between those highs, once this bar has been finished and is created, the difference between those high become new information there. Let's take another example. Let's complicate it just a little bit. Let's put an inside bar. Now, if you're looking for a place to buy, then the thing you're interested in is the difference between this high and this high. If you're looking for a place to sell, you're looking for the difference between this low and this low. So this particular bar, which we call an inside bar, has 2 bits of information. It has new information both on the top and on the bottom. So the new information is in both places, and we would read from right to left, and we would have the new information for the buy would be there, the new information for the sell would be there. And then if we have an outside bar, on an outside bar, we have no new information created because in the highs, the sellers were not able to bring the buyers low, and on the downside, the buyers were not able to bring the sellers back into line. So in an outside bar, we have no new information. So what we're going to do today is we're going to review this. Again, the new information basically comes from the new highs and new lows reading from right to left. Let's look at this another way. The way we want to put an order in here is that if we're going away from the top of the mountain, and remember that away from this is the top of the mountain, the blue line, the balance line, the 13-bar smooth average that's offset 8 bars into the future, and we want to stay going with the trend and going downhill because it's easier to go downhill than uphill. And going away from the balance line, and we're going to spend more time on this and in detail, but let me just preview it right now. If this were the current bar, then we would want to go long 1 tick above this bar. If we're going away from the balance line, we want the base plus 1. If we're going toward the balance line, in this area here we would be selling, then we would need base minus 2. So this would be our base bar, this would be our 1, and this would be our second bar, so we would have a sell down here. Now, realize that the balance line is here, and we would be selling into the alligator's mouth. So in this condition, we would have a sell signal here, but we would not sell it because we would be feeding the alligator. And we would go up and up and up, and in no place in here, and you remember from the alligator, we don't want to feed the alligator. So at this point, we would simply, we want to simply notice these signals, and then later on during the week, we're going to show you which signals we are really going to take. So this is enough for your first day. Think about this. Go back to the computorial again, as we just suggested. Go back to the book. Go back to the study manual. And make sure that you understand several things. Number one, that when you're looking for the balance line, you're always reading from right to left. Anything you do on the price chart, you're reading from right to left. And new information is reading from right to left. For a buy signal, you're only interested in the highs. For a sell signal, you're only interested in the lows. And on the chart, when you're looking for a signal, if you're going away from the mountain, it's base plus 1 or base minus 1. If you're going toward the mountaintop, it's always, you add to it because it takes more steps going uphill than going downhill. It takes more energy, so it takes 2 steps. So it's base plus 2 for a buy or base minus 2 new lower lows for a sell going toward the mountaintop. Tomorrow we're going to look at this in more detail about buying and selling above and below the balance line. And we're going to spend all week on this, so be patient. This may seem a little bit difficult at first, a little more difficult than the others. It really isn't once you get the hang of it. We'll see you tomorrow. Make sure that you do your morning pages, your AT again, and get ready to have some fun. See you tomorrow. Here we are now at day 2, week 8, and today what our job is to look at all the possibilities of buying and selling the balance line signals both above and below the balance line. So let's go again to our slides, and let's look at the goal today is to understand buying the market when the price is both above and below the balance line. And this is the slide we ended with yesterday, and remember we looked at this pointing out that it takes a lot less energy for this market to move up than it does for this market to move down. As a matter of fact, this move here, where the cursor is from here to here, probably took as much energy as it did to move at least twice that far going up this direction. So now let's take all the possible alternatives we can think of buying above the balance line. And we're going to leave this slide on here, and we're going to look at this slide, and we're going to examine each one of them. Let's look over here at A first. Here is a bar, a price bar, and here is a second price bar. And remember, everything on the price chart you read from right to left. So in illustration A, the base bar, which is always either the most recent bar or the most recent low, most recent high if you're looking for a buy, the most recent low high is your base bar. So in this illustration, this base bar would be here. And we illustrate that, or we note that by the letter B. Then the first bar with a higher high, bar number 1 here, gives us our buy signal. And we would buy 1 tick above the top of bar number 1. And this would be an actual buy because we're going away from the balance line, so we would be going away from the alligator. So this would be a legitimate buy. Now let's look over to the right to illustration B. Very similar to illustration A, and we're looking only at the highs because we want to buy here. Here's our first bar, and then we have a lower high, which creates a base bar. Now we have a base plus 1 because we're going away from the balance line, which means we're traveling downhill, and we're reading from right to left. Then this bar to the right of B has a higher high. Now the base, remember, it's very easy to find the base. If you're looking for a buy, you look for the most recent low bar. Now this is the low high. This is the bar that has the most recent lowest high of the 3 bars here. So this would be your base bar. So you would go base plus 1 tick, and your buy would be right there. Now here's an important illustration, and you've been exposed to the blue light specials. You know what the blue light specials are. Let's go through this 5-bar sequence here on the lower left under illustration C. This was our first bar. Then this was our second bar, and it had a lower high. So that was a base bar, and since we are going away from the mountain, we're going away from the blue line, from the mountaintop, then our buy would be at base plus 1 tick. Then the next bar, the third bar, had a still lower high. So this then becomes the base bar. And our buy now would be base plus 1 tick. So the market has said, we would let you buy this at this price, but we put on a sale, and now you can buy it at this price. Then let's go to our fourth bar, another lower high. That becomes the base. This is the base plus 1 tick. So the market again says, we're going to let you have it for even lower price. Here's our current bar. This is our base bar, and this would be our buy 1 tick. So in this illustration, the market has really put on a good sale for us. First of all, we would have to pay this price for it. Then the market says, no, we're going to let you have it for this price. So hopefully these 3 illustrations will give you some repetition on the fundamentals, and it doesn't really get any more complicated than this. There's one other factor, though, that we need to discuss here that's very important, and that is where the base bar over here on the lower right at D, where the base bar is relatively unimportant. What is important is where the signal is when it's hit. And the signal, the base bar here, is below the blue line, so we'd normally expect a base plus 2 higher highs. But since the first higher high is on the other side of the mountain, then the path of least resistance from this signal, where it's hit, is on this side of the mountain, so the path of least resistance would be up. So the buy signal is base plus 1 if the signal bar itself crosses the mountain. If the signal bar was lower than that, we'll look at that illustration in just a moment. Again, reviewing. It's very simple in A, very simple in B. C is an illustration of a blue light special, and D is very important to remember that in all of the Profittunity signals, it's where the signal bar is hit that is important. So when this is hit, when this is formed, it's above the blue line, so it would only take base plus 1. Think about that for a bit, then go to the computorial if you need to, go to the book if you'd like to, go to the study manual. It's all in all 3 of those places. Now, let's practice some. Let's look at some practice pages of balance line buy signals above the balance line. Let's look at this illustration from an actual chart. Here's our question. Where is the base bar? Now, the base bar is the most recent low high, the lowest recent high. So look at this and see if you can figure it out. Here it is. That's it. That is the base bar. So we're going to label that the base bar. And one bar back with a higher high is going to be our signal. So that's our signal where the arrow is right here. The base bar, that's 1. So one tick above that, if the price goes above that, we would buy there. And it only takes one bar, base plus 1, because the mountaintop is way back here. The path of least resistance is up. And in this case, up is downhill. Let's go to another illustration. Here we have a base bar, because that bar is the most recent lowest high. And here we have the balance line buy signal, which would be one tick above that bar. And the reason it's that bar is because the base bar, although the base bar is below the balance line, the signal bar, when it's hit, would be above the balance line. And we also have 3 subsequent bars, but these bars have higher highs, so that does not change the base bar. The base bar is still the most recent lowest high. So these 3 bars here do not affect the buy signal. The buy signal is there on this bar, same here, same here, same there. And if the next bar goes above that, we would indeed be long one tick above that bar. Now, let's take another. This is a trick question, by the way. And the question here is there a balance line buy? Where is the balance line buy on the most recent bar? And remember that to have a balance line buy, you have to read from right to left, and the signal must be higher high than the last bar. Well, since there isn't a higher high, then there's no signal there. Now let's move on to buying below the balance line. And remember that from the alligator in session 3 and from everything we've talked about, we don't want to buy and feed the alligator. If we buy below the alligator's mouth, we're feeding the alligator. So these are signals for practice, but in actual practice, they would only be stops if you decided to use that as an executive decision. And later on, Justine is going to take you through our 4 techniques of making an executive decision as to which stop to use. So in illustration A here, we have a base bar. Since we're below the mountaintop, it takes 2. So here's the base plus 1 plus 2 plus 1 tick above that second bar. That would be a buy. On the illustration in B over here, we also have a base bar. Reading from right to left, we have a higher high, which would be our first bar, and then our second higher high would be our signal 1 tick above that. The current bar here is not the lowest high, so it's not the base bar. And remember that the base bar for buying is always the most recent lowest high. And here in illustration C, our first buy, when this bar was completed here, the base bar, when that was a base bar, it'd be base plus 1 plus 2. That would be our buy. Then it moved down to here. Then it moved down to here. Then it moved down to here. And our current buy stop would be this base plus 1 higher high plus a second higher high. So our buy stop would be there. Now, let's look at some practice pages using the balance line buys below the balance line. See if you can see where the balance line buy on this current time frame would be. This is the last bar. Remember that we're looking for the lowest, most recent high. So where would the buy signal be? And you found it. It's right there. And let's go back just a moment. This is the buy here because we have a base plus 1 plus 2 plus 1 tick. Now remember, on all of these balance line buys below the balance line, we would not initiate new longs there because that would be feeding the alligator. Any balance line buy above the balance line we would take because that's a grounded signal and that's part of the 5 grounded dimensions. So here we are at the end of day 2 of week 8. And again, we want to remind you to do your morning pages and your AT. And make sure that you're back here tomorrow about the same time in the same place. And we're going to look at balance line sells both above and below the balance line. So getting ready for that, you might want to review the basics, which is the balance line, what it means. It's the top of the mountain. And going toward the balance line, it's always tougher than going away from the balance line. So have a good night. Make sure you enjoy yourself. We'll be back here tomorrow, same time, same station. Thank you very much. Well, it's nice to see you back here for day 3 of week 8. Remember, on day 1 of week 8, we looked at the balance line, what it is, and what new information is. Then yesterday, we looked at the buys both above and below the balance line. And remember that when you're going away from the balance line, you're going downhill. When you're going toward the balance line, you're going uphill. So we make it twice as hard to get a signal going uphill as going downhill. And that works quite well in the market. Today, what we're going to do, we're going to look at both selling both above and below the balance line. So let's go to our charts and let's look at the selling above and below the balance line. This is today's goal. It's to understand selling the market when the price is above and below the balance line. And let's keep our illustrations about like they were for buying above and below. And this time we're selling above. And remember that we really don't want to feed the alligator, so these are we would use these as a stop, not to initiate a new long position. And it's very simple. It takes the base plus minus 1, minus 1 means a lower low, minus 2. So we have to have a base and 2 lower lows, and then 1 tick below that would be our sell signal. And in part B over here, or in portion B, we have a similar situation. We have a base, which is the most recent highest low. And remember that when you're looking for a buy, you're looking at the most recent lowest high. When you're looking for a sell, you're looking for the most recent highest low. This is the most recent highest low. So this is our base bar. And this becomes 1 lower low, and this becomes our signal because we're going uphill. Now, this most recent bar has no effect on it because it's not the base bar, because it's the most recent highest low. If you use this as a base bar, that would put your sell further down, and if you kept following it down with the current bar, you would never, ever get out, or you'd never get short. So it's the most recent highest low. It's very important to remember that. And then down here, we have the blue light special. On this particular bar, when that bar was current, that was the most recent highest low, so that was the base bar. This was 1, and this was the second, so our first sell would be just under that lowest low there. Then it moved up to there, putting our sell here, moved up to the number 1, putting our sell here, and the current base bar is here, 1 bar, 2 bars, so the current sell would be here. Now let's go to some actual charts and let's practice this and see if we can understand it better. What we're looking for is a sell. Now, once again, I want to caution you to remember always that you never, never feed the alligator. So these are signals, but they're not signals we would take because they're above the alligator's mouth, and we, again, don't want to feed them. So we need to find the balance line sell on this chart. And remember that you have to have a base, 1 lower low than the base, and a lower low than that one, and that becomes your current sell signal. Now, again, the blue light special is illustrated on this bar. When this was the current bar, then the sell was here. When this bar was current, the sell moved up to there, and on the current bar, the sell moved up to there. So you have a blue light special here. Let's take another example. Where is the balance line sell in this bar, in this chart, looking at this current bar? The balance line sell, that would be our base. This would be our first lower low, and this would be our second lower low, and that is our sell signal. Now, let's look at this balance line sell, and this is going to be not a trick question, but this is a very, very important concept. Remember that the comedian Flip Wilson, who used to have the Church of What's Happening Now. What we want to do is trade the market of what's happening now. So we look for our sell here, and where's our base bar? It's the most recent highest low. So this is the most recent bar. Our base bar is actually up here. That's our most recent highest low, and I put the base here to show you that in this case it doesn't make any difference because both bases are above the most recent highest low. So if that's the base, then this is the first bar, and then we have to go all the way over to the left to get the second bar. Now here's the trick part of the question. Look at this part of the market here. Here was a base bar but at that time, because that was the most recent highest low before these last three bars were constructed. We had a -1 bar here, a lower low, and a second lower low there. So our stop would have been one tick, our signal would have been one tick below that bar here. That was hit on that bar. Now that most recent balance line sell has been hit. So the current one, we can't take this current sell over here because that's old information. The previous balance line buy was hit on that bar. So it's very, very important to remember that you always take the market of what's happening now. The uniqueness of our entire approach is based upon this. We are not really, we don't consider ourselves to be technical analysts. We consider ourselves to be market behavioralists. We're trading the current behavior of the market. Let's take an example now, or 3, 4 examples, about selling below the line. Now these are true sell signals because the market is below the mountaintop and we want to get in as quickly as we can. So all we need is a base -1, one lower low. And we would sell one tick below here. Over here we have a base, which is the most recent highest low, and one bar that's lower than that we would sell here. This third bar has no effect on it because it is not a base bar. This is your base bar. Here we have an example of the blue light special coming up. Our first sell was here, and the market's letting us have it here. And again, just as we did in the balance line buys, we have a base to sell. The highest low is above the balance line, but the signal itself is below the balance line, so it only takes the minimum, because when this signal is hit, you're already on the downhill side. Now this is the base. Again, the base is not as important as where the signal is. It's the location of the signal relative to the mountaintop. Now, let's look at some practice pages again. And here we have a balance line sell signal. We have the mountaintop, as you can see, the blue line here. We're below the blue line, so we want to get in as quickly as we can because we have a signal, which is a balance line signal. Not only do we have a signal, but we're going downhill. So we want to take the path of least resistance. Here's our base bar. Here's our sell signal because we only need one. Now let's go for a trick question again. And the trick question this time is, can you find the sell signal on this last current bar here? Remember, what you have to have for a sell signal is that you have to have a base. This is the most recent. You have to find this base, the current bar, and then you have to go back and find a lower bar. So the question is, where is the balance line sell? Is there a balance line sell? No, there sure isn't, because there is no new information. There's nothing lower than the low of the current bar. And that's our job for today, is to review the balance line sales both above and below the balance line. That's about it. That's about enough for today. What we've done so far this week, again, to review, this is the first day we looked at the base +1 going away from the mountain, base +2 climbing up the mountain. Then 2 days ago we looked at selling, buying above and below the balance line. Today we looked at selling above and below the balance line. Then we're going to add another factor tomorrow which really makes this signal pretty lethal, and that is how to differentiate the signals when you're in the various zones. And last week Justine spent the whole week with you on zones, so you understand what the zones are, and we're going to show you how to improve the balance line, both its efficiency as a stop and also as an entry, by putting the zones and the balance line, combining the two. So be here tomorrow, and in between time, make sure you do your morning pages, your ride-ons, and also your AT. See you here tomorrow. Same time, same station. Thank you very much. Here we are at day 4, week 8. We're almost 2/3 away through this home study course, and this is going to be getting you ready for your personal tutorial when you come in here, right here in our trading room, where we'll work together and trade together. Today what we're going to do, we're going to look at how the zones, the different zones, the red, gray, and green zones, affect your balance line buys and sells. So let's go right to the charts now. Today's goal again in writing is to understand how the various zones affect the location of the balance line buys and sells signals. So we're going to add another factor which is going to make our trading much better. And let's review the zones, just the balance line first. What we have here is the balance line on the horizontal, and we have the difference between the buys and the sells on the vertical. So on the left, this is buying above the balance line. Here we're buying below the balance line, selling above the balance line, selling below the balance line. And as we've gone over this week, to buy above the balance line, all it takes is a base plus 1. But to buy below the balance line, since you're going uphill, takes the base plus 2. Likewise, selling below the balance line, the top of the hill, we want to get in very rapidly, so that only takes base minus 1. But selling above, on the other side, coming up the hill, takes base plus 2. Now, again, we've gone over the zones. Justine did that with you last week, and we're going to make it difficult to buy in the red zone and sell in the green zone. The thinking behind this, if you think about this for just a moment, I think you'll agree that it makes ultimate sense. If you're in the red zone, it means that the momentum is down. Not only is the momentum down, but it's increasing down. It's accelerating downward. So if you're trying to buy the market in a zone, in a red zone, where the momentum is down and it's increasing, the speed is increasing down, what we want to do very simply is just make it twice as hard to buy. So if you're above the balance line and you want to buy and you're in the red zone, then it requires base plus 2 higher highs. If you're below the balance line, climbing up the hill, and the market is going down, we want to make it doubly hard by making it base plus 4. Again, the thinking behind this is that the market breathes. It never goes to the top all the way to the bottom. It has hiccups as it's going down, and we don't want to get out on these hiccups. We only want to get out when the trend changes. So if it stays in the red zone, then we want to make it twice as hard to buy. If it's in the red zone and then the current bar goes into the gray zone or the green zone, either one, then all we do is flip back to 2, or the regular signals. So if we have 4 red bars and we have a buy stop below the balance line and then it goes into the gray zone, our buy stop then would just revert back to base plus 2. Likewise, when we're in the green zone, and remember that the green zone signifies that the momentum is up, not only is it up, but it's accelerating up. So we want to make it twice as hard to sell. So if we're below the balance line trying to sell, instead of base minus 1, if the zone is green, if the price bar is green on our software, then it has to be base plus 2. If we're above the balance line and we're trying to sell, and it's in the green zone, which means the momentum is up and it's accelerating up, we want to make it base minus 4. Now, if you've downloaded our proprietary software, Investor's Dream, it's a very good practice tool. You can go through that one bar at a time, and you will see that the bars, this strategy is taken advantage of, that the bars that aren't effective or are not really signals are grayed out, and it automatically takes into account the zone that you're in. So don't let this don't overcomplicate this. This is very simple. You have your key here. When it's in the gray zone, it's always this. When you're buying in the green zone, it's that, or when you're selling in the red zone, it's that. The only difference is when you're buying in the red zone or selling in the green zone. So if you'll think about that for a few moments, I think it'll make ultimate sense to you. Now we're going to go to 2 simple charts, and we're going to look at this. We want to look at the balance line in the green zone. Now here's the green zone. At this point here in the middle, you can see the balance line. It's a very narrow line on this chart, but we're below the balance line, and we're trying to sell. We're trying to sell in the green zone. The most recent highest low is here. Normally, when you're below the mountaintop in selling, you would only go base plus or base minus 1. So your sell would be here. But because the current bar, which is here or here or here, we're still in the green zone. If this current bar is green, it would require double that amount. So it would be base minus 1 minus 2, and as you can see, this bar has never been hit. If this bar were gray or red, or if the next bar becomes gray or red, then we go back to the normal. The bar, the zone you're in, depends upon the bar that you are currently in. Now let's take an example, a simple example in the red zone. This is a buy in the red zone. First of all, we want to look for the balance line. The balance line's up here. Then we want to look for the base, which is the most recent lowest high, since we're interested in highs because we're in the buying mode. Here's our base. We're in the red zone. When this base was formed, not only were we in the red zone then, we've had 2 higher highs, but the current bar is still in the red zone. So now, since we're buying in the red zone, we want to double whatever is normally necessary. Normally it's base plus 2, but here we want to double it, so it would be base plus 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. So our buy signal is here. And again, we want to remind you that in these illustrations, we would be using these as stops, but not to initiate new positions, because we do not want to feed the alligator. We don't want to buy below the line. So reviewing today, what we've covered is we have covered the effect that the zones have on the balance line buys. And it's very easy. If you're in the red zone, you make it doubly hard to buy in the red zone. If you're in the green zone, you make it doubly hard to sell. In the gray zone, it doesn't matter. When you're selling in the red zone, it doesn't matter. When you're buying in the green zone, it doesn't matter. So this has been a short day because we want you to also go to the manual, to the textbook, and especially to the computorial to look at these and study them, and then go to Investor's Dream. If you haven't downloaded that, you should be downloading that currently, and practice on several charts, both bonds and stocks. They work exactly the same way in both of them. As a matter of fact, it's a little bit even more precise in stocks and bonds, but you don't have the leverage in bonds and stocks that you have in commodities. So that's about it for day 4. Hi again. We're here now for the last day of the 8th week, and we're about 2/3 through. And what we're going to do today is we're going to review the balance line buys and sells and how the zones affect them. We're going to quickly review the 4 days of this week. And again, let me encourage you to download Investor's Dream to practice, because you can go through one bar at a time and see how these zones affect and change the buys and sells. Also, look at your computorial. There are a lot more charts there to practice on. And look at the study manuals and also the textbook. So right now, let's go right to the charts and let's review everything that we've talked about so far this week. What we've done this week, we started out by, again, reviewing that the balance line is that place where the current price would be if there were no new incoming information, which we know to be chaos. This week, our goal has been to understand the construction, the use, and the trading of the balance line in both stocks and commodities. Let's review the charts that we've already seen. Here's buying above the balance line, and when you're buying above the balance line, remember it's very simple, base plus 1. And remember that the base is the most recent lowest high. So here we have the recent lowest high. The buy stop would be here. This third bar does not affect it because it is not lower than the most recent lowest high. We have an illustration here of the blue light special. The first buy was here, then it moved to here, then it came down even further, and finally at this point the market's willing to sell us base plus 1, or willing to sell us so that we can buy it right there. The most important thing to remember about this, so that you don't get confused, is that the crucial location is where the signal is. It doesn't matter where the base starts off, it's where that signal is hit. If that signal is hit above the top of the mountain, it's going up, would be downhill. If it's hit below, the path of least resistance is down. Let's look at buying below. The only difference between buying below and selling below is it takes twice as many new highs, twice as much new information to buy it as it does to sell it. So over here it takes base plus 1 plus 2. Over here it takes base plus 1 plus 2. And base, remember, is always on a buy the most recent lowest high. Here the most recent lowest high is down here. The market has again given us a blue light special. Let's look now at selling. Selling above the line means that we're going uphill. So it takes twice as much. It takes base minus 1, minus 2, minus 1 tick below the bottom of the bar labeled 2. Over here we have a base minus 1, minus 2. Again, the most recent bar is not the base because the base is the most recent highest low. And again, we have an illustration of the market going up and giving us a blue light special. And remember, once again, that these are stops if it's selling above the alligator. If it's selling below the alligator, it's entries. Now let's look at selling below the balance line, and since we're below the balance line, these would indeed be entries, provided that a fractal down has been our first signal, and that fractal down outside the alligator's mouth has already been hit. Then we want to be very aggressive. So anytime the market gives us a base minus 1 below, we want to sell. And over here we have base minus 1, we want to sell. We have a blue light special, and once again, this D illustration in the lower right hand corner illustrates that it doesn't matter so much where the base is, it's where that signal bar is hit. That's the important thing. So you would be short 1 tick below that. So that's our basic balance line buys and sells, and then we add the momentum to that, and the green zones and the red zones. The green zone, remember, is the momentum's up, it's accelerating. When you're in the red zone, the momentum's down, and it's accelerating toward the downside. So if it's accelerating toward the downside, whatever you would normally do in a green area or a gray area, which would be buy plus 1 up here, you double it, buy base plus 2. Here to buy it would be base plus 2, but if you're in the red zone, base plus 4. Likewise, if you're in the gray or red zone and you're selling the market, it would be base minus 2 above, but if you're in the green zone, which means that the momentum and the acceleration is up, you would double that. And on the downside, it would only take base minus 1, but in the green zone, we would double that to base minus 2. So we've gone over this over and over again because it really is simple. It may sound a little bit confusing and a little bit difficult at first, but practice on this and you'll find it's very, very easy. We're coming now to the end of the 8th weekend, and here's what our job is. We want to review the week to make sure that you understood the balance line signals and how to locate them on the chart. We also want to review all the material that we've covered so far in this study, and we want to make sure that you plan to have a great date with your inner trader this weekend. Also, I hope that you're continuing to record your reaction in your morning pages, what you learned about yourself and what makes you happy, and then also how this can aid you in your trading. What you still have to look forward to is we're going to spend a week on stops. We're going to spend a week on the Elliott wave, how to accurately count the Elliott wave. Then we're going to spend most of a week looking at the markets and showing you how we would trade. We're all going to get together here and talk about different charts and what we would do on the different charts. And then the last week, the 12th week, we're going to spend that entire week with a schedule of how we suggest that you use psychological facilitation, how to get in the zone in trading and get to that highest peak where you are a master trader. So have a good weekend. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy your have fun. Study the manuals, and we'll be here next week for week 9.